And just okay, now we can start. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's a pleasure for us to have you joining us in this webinar of this day, focused on the role of digitalization in the deployment of rooftop solar PV in Africa and the regulatory implications. My name is Josue Roxenyo. I'm a research assistant at the African School of Regulation, and I'll be the host and moderator of the discussions today. With a quick introduction with the African School of Regulation, we are a school which offers a range of capacity building activities on regulation for a sustainable energy transition in Africa. These activities range from webinars like this one in English, but also in French. So we have one coming up next week in French as well. And we have also policy dialogues and talks, have online conferences and training courses offered either online or in presential. So quickly setting up the discussion for today, we know that millions of Africans still lack access to reliable electricity and clean cooking facility. To achieve universal access and reach the sustainable development goals, Africa must leverage on its abundant and distributed energy resources, TERs like solar, wind, etc. But the integration of rooftop solar, for instance, in the grid brings about changes in the management of the grid, affecting how electricity is generated, transported, and consumed. As the rate of this penetration grows in different parts of the continent, careful regulatory considerations and advanced digital technologies are required to ensure smooth operation of the grid and benefits for both distribution companies and consumers. But there are a few questions that need to be answered. What is the role of digitalization in rooftop solar deployment? What are the regulatory adjustments needed to support the large adoption of these technologies? And how could the digital solutions help improve tariff design in the presence of rooftop PV and reduce the financial impact on utilities while ensuring a fair treatment for all stakeholders? These are a few questions that I am very delighted to explore today with a rich panel of experts in the field who will share their knowledge and experience on the topic. It will be basically a discussion-based webinar, and we will hear from the different panelists, which I will introduce shortly. But also for the audience, feel free to type your questions in the Q&A chat, and at the end of the discussion, we will be able to answer some of them and maybe later answer the rest by writing. So quickly moving on to the presentation of the panelists. First, we have Shoel Nana. Shoel Nana is the project manager at Sustainable Energy Africa, and he's also a fellow at the Energy for Growth Hub. He's a PhD candidate with the Energy Systems Research Group at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and his experience spans over urban energy profiling, citywide energy systems modeling, and electric mobility. At the SEA, he focuses on supporting the African utilities and regulators in managing the integration of distributed generation into distribution networks. Joel, we are happy to have you today. Next, we have Mohamed Fayez Henda. He's an energy regulation expert specialized in advising regulators, utilities, and businesses on cost-effective energy transition strategies via technical and financial planning and also tariff design. His work is focused in the Middle East and North Africa MENA region, and he has a proven track record in guiding energy project to regulatory compliance while optimizing costs and ensuring profitability. He provides strategic advice tailored for navigating the energy transition and has been involved in many regulatory reform projects in the electricity industry in Africa. Mohamed, it's a pleasure for us to have you today. And last but not least, we have Robin Okoye, who is a commissioner at the Enugu State Electricity Regulatory Commission in Nigeria. He's a seasoned legal and regulatory expert with over 3 decades of experience in the Nigerian electricity sector. He played a key role in the 2011-2013 privatization of the Nigerian power sector, contributing to the negotiation and finalization of critical industry agreements. And after that, he held senior positions in two privatized electricity distribution companies where he led regulatory compliance efforts. Currently at the EERC, he oversees tariff issues, licensing, and performance monitoring in the electricity market in the Enugu state of Nigeria. We are also pleased to have you here, Ruben. Now that we have our panelists, we would like to first of all understand what is the state of rooftop PV integration into the grid. As we know, the penetration of rooftop PV in the electricity network has been gaining momentum in different parts of Africa due to many reasons. Some of them are the availability of the resources, the decreasing of the PV technology prices, and the policies that are encouraging the integration of these renewable energy source, especially we're talking about solar PV. But what is the actual state of these integration in different parts of the continent? This is the first question I would like to start with. And Joel, if you would like to give us some insights on these. Thank you.
Thank you, and happy to be here. Just checking that you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you clearly.
Great. I'm just quickly going to share one slide. I know we said it's going to be discussion based, so not too much presentation, but if you just bear with me, because it's a bit more appealing visually. Confirming that you can see my slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Right, so I promise I'm not going to sound like a solar evangelist, but it's hard to not sound like one when you see the scale and pace of deployment in Africa. So let's start with Eswatini, this very little country with the system capacity of just about 234 megawatt. As of June or July this year, they were already sitting with about 30 megawatt of rooftop solar PV. This is purely just rooftop solar PV or maybe a mix of rooftop and ground mount PV, but it's all on-site generation. In Namibia as well, we have about 96 megawatt there already on the network as of May this year, which makes up about 15% of Namibia's maximum demand. Kenya, just recently, we also had a chance to chat with the regulator there, and they told us that they have about 200 megawatt, or precisely 196 megawatt of captive generation, what they call captive generation, purely solar, which is already about 9% of Kenya's maximum demand as well. And what is quite surprising is that when you put this into perspective, the reason why I have this percentage as a result of, as a share of the national demand is because when you calculate the same percentage for advanced markets like France or Spain or some of these advanced markets where it has been happening for a lot of years, you will see that they actually are at the same level of penetration or even lower. So in a way, some African countries, when you isolate just rooftop solar PV, some African countries are well ahead of some of the advanced markets in terms of penetration. And here I'm talking just of rooftop solar PV. What is also quite interesting is that in most of these advanced markets where you've seen this deployment of you've heard about solar PV for the better part of a decade or even more, in these African countries that I have here on the map, it's been happening only over 3 to 4 years. So in a way, South Africa, Namibia, Eswatini all reached these percentage penetration levels just in about 3 or 4 years. Just some context, South Africa in 2019, we had about 500 megawatt of distributed solar or behind the meter solar on the network. And as of December last year, so that's just 4 years, we climbed up to 5 gigawatt. So you can imagine the exponential rate at which this is building up on our grids. Also, you've probably, I'm sure all the time when we hear about rooftop solar PV or solar in general, we think about large subsidies, we think about financial incentives. You'll be surprised that this deployment in in these emerging markets has been happening almost or sometimes entirely without any financial backing or financial incentives. It's purely driven by the favorable economics. Literally, people or businesses seeing it like a great business case, and they're just ready to pay the upfront cost themselves. In a way, it's self-funded. So these are mostly commercial installations, by the way, in these African markets, less so residential. It's only in South Africa where you have a high share of residential installations because of the affordability and maybe energy security reasons. But in all these markets, it's mostly commercial, ranging from small commercial systems to large industrial facilities. So that is in a quick nutshell what I wanted to present here. And maybe the message that I'm trying to leave the audience with is that contrary to the usual narrative that we might be begging for funding and we might be lagging behind deployment, we actually we actually leading in some aspects. There's a very useful report from RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, that was released just maybe a month ago, that confirms exactly this. Although it speaks about more the global south, but it shows that indeed the global south, including some African countries like these ones, are actually leading the world in terms of rooftop deployment. So this is a positive development for the continent, and I think there is huge opportunity to maximize on this trend to make the most of in terms of addressing the energy access and other challenges that the continent is facing. Over to you, Josue.
All right, thank you very much for these introductory insights on what different countries are actually up to in terms of PV integration. And it's quite interesting to see that we are actually not lagging behind. We have the resources, and despite the challenges that have been reported in many contexts, we see that African countries actually have the potential to leverage on these solar resources as much as we can. But yet there are still challenges in that we need to overcome. And this is one of them is the large-scale integration. As we can see, still few countries have this level of penetration, and we aim to go bigger. So what are currently some of the challenges that we are still facing, technological limitations and challenges associated with the large-scale deployment of rooftop solar in the different African countries? And this is the next question, and I would like to bring Mohammed to have your insights on this question.
Thank you, Rock, and thank you, Joel, for sharing those quite informative data about the status of rooftop applications in Africa. I just want to capitalize on a quite interesting sentence you just put, which is that those existing projects, they come at no financial incentives. And this is quite important, because if you look now at a rooftop application, they are purely a decision of consumers. And consumers, they are put in a position to simply compare between electricity rates, that buying electricity from the utility, and on the other side, the levelized cost of energy they would get from a power purchase agreement of those for those rooftop applications, or even they can go for an installation. So in those two scenarios, we see that the reducing prices and the reduction we can see now in technology costs for PV specifically is quite massive, and that is challenging the volumetric rates that are mostly volumetric in Africa in the utilities, and therefore in those countries where we see this rooftop applications coming to the market are because of this interaction between the technology costs, the reduction in technology costs, and the very high electricity rates. So in other countries, if we consider, for example, other countries with lower rates, it would be a bit quite of a challenge to a consumer to adopt those rooftop applications. And therefore, here comes the question: how can we further have rates that can indeed allow for the adoption of rooftop application, yet also are quite fair in allocating the costs to different consumers? And that's a quite long story, and this is a challenge that needs to be addressed, because basically, from a regulatory perspective, if you want to allow for the energy transition, and allow for rooftop application, we need also to ensure the cost recovery of your electric utilities, because those are the utilities that are going to serve the consumers. And therefore, the rates should be they should be able to recover their costs and in a fair way. Therefore, this is a quite important thing that we need to look at and to consider as regulators. How can we have this solution that can push for the adoption of PV and the adoption of those distributed generators, and at the same time remunerate the utility for its activity, its investments, and the resources it put into getting these grids functioning? And I think throughout the discussion, we're going to dig deeper into those challenges. Yes.
So we are definitely going to deep dive into these challenges of what are the impacts of rooftop solar integration on the remuneration of the utilities. And Joel, do you have anything to comment on what are the technological limitations that we still need to overcome to bring forward these adoption of rooftop PV in the different countries that your work is focused on?
Yeah, some of the maybe not technological, but technical solutions, technical challenges, is that unfortunately the deployment that I'm very excited about, that I showed you a few minutes ago, are being rolled out, or it's happening in a sort of non-regulatory compliance manner. So it's people just wanting to save on cost, people maybe trying to look for alternative sources of supply, but then they are not like proper regulatory frameworks in place, but also technical specifications that they need to comply with at the moment. So in a way, me as a customer installing my rooftop solar PV system or on-site generation, usually I do so just based off on what the installer will tell me I can do on my property. But I'm not aware of some sort of technical limitations by the grid. I'm not aware of maybe some sort of grid code compliance protocols that I need to comply with. So in a way, the technical challenges are associated with the lack of specifications, the lack of permitting processes, and so it happens in a sort of uncontrolled, illegal or clandestine. Maybe I will not use clandestine because technically there's nothing in place, but ideally you will want this system to sort of follow some sort of network compliance to make sure they are not just safe, but also it's rolled out, like Mohammed said, in a sustainable manner that does not affect the utility negatively.
Yes, sure. Technical specifications and limitations are definitely needed when we are growing in terms of integration, and this is still a challenge in many countries. And you also mentioned the regulatory aspect of it. So now we would turn to Mr. Ruben Koye to see from your regulatory perspective, what is the current state of the integration of rooftop PV in your country or in the state where you are currently focused on, and what are those challenges that you face in terms of supporting the development of rooftop solar?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joshua. Now, we have I don't think it's news to anybody in the world that electricity scarcity is probably the most urgent, the most pressing developmental challenge in Nigeria. That we have about 85,000 people, 85 million people without access. It's a scandal. And right now, I can tell you that there is no case of distributed rooftop solution in our country. The one that I know about that was attempted and never worked was a situation where the Ministry of Power signed, wanted as it were, to have a collaboration with the distribution utility in Abuja. They were to generate about 750 kilowatt peak rooftop solar. All right, and they had all the motions and everything. Now there was no regulation in place. The network that was the power was to be injected was unreliable, and at the end of the day, nothing came of it. So right now, the big problem is that the grid is unstable. I don't mind saying it that in the past 3 weeks or so, we've had about 4 grid collapses in my country. And I'm not talking about a section of the country, but the whole country goes out. So how do you do distributed generation in such a situation where the grid could go out at any time? So people are trying to do things on top of their roofs, but it is just for them. There is no plan. There is no opportunity for them to be integrated into the distribution utility network because they are not just there. Even at the transmission level, I saw a recent audit of the system operations in Nigeria, and the audit said that the system operation was like a pilot that was flying blind because there wasn't enough visibility, there wasn't enough what would you call it? Enough a digital solution that would enable them to manage the grid adequately. And so it is not a surprise that it wasn't yesterday or 2 days ago, there was another grid collapse. So these are the challenges in the country. There is no case of distributed generation in Nigeria at the moment, and it all has to do with first of all the nature of the grid, and then we talk about issues of affordability. Maybe at some point I could elaborate more about the issue of affordability of grid solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oben, for highlighting some of these limitations and challenges that Nigeria is still facing in terms of grid management and also deployment of TERs. And you actually mentioned some buzzwords that I would name them, like affordability, grid code, and also management, digital solutions for management of the grid. These are all actual limitations that many African countries are still facing at this stage, but we would like to overcome these challenges. And I would like to then explore what are then the root causes of these different challenges that we just mentioned. And we can think about digital infrastructure that is still very underdeveloped in many countries. This is one common cause that we can already think about because we know this is obvious in many countries. But what are other causes, or even how do you see us overcoming this digital infrastructure challenge, and what are other root causes of the problems that are still underpinning the development of rooftop solar in the different countries? I would like to start with Mohammed.
Thank you, Rock, for the interesting question. Indeed, we need to look at the root causes in order to address this challenge and allow for the presence of those distributed energy resources in Africa. And as you have just mentioned, the digital infrastructure. Indeed, this is quite an important pillar If we need to look at an electricity market in an abstract way, we have this hardware layer, grids, metering infrastructures, power plants, but still we do have this kind of soft layer, which is more about the regulation. And if we start first with the digital layer, we see that there is a lack in a digitalized metering infrastructure. A metering infrastructure that can really allow for cost allocation, allow to allocate the costs of those assets that we have in our system. Unfortunately, this is not the case yet. And therefore, for example, if you think now of the existing out-of-date metering infrastructure, depending on those basic meters that cannot differentiate between the kilowatt hour consumed and the kilowatt hour injected into the grid, we mean that at the end of the day, you're netting energy. And netting energy is a quite important element in the process, because if you say that a kilowatt hour costs you the same in the morning as it costs you in the night, this is quite a strong statement, because this is not the case. In the morning, for example, here you have most of the solar energy produced in the morning, and if you produce it and you give it to the grid in the morning at the low cost, because they are low cost, then in the night you're going to recall it back and use it at a higher cost for the utility, but not a cost that you're paying. It's a cost that the utility will fully bear without a way to allocate it to the consumer. And this this small issue that we see indeed would result in a misallocation of costs, and this would, in some cases, as we can see, also de-incentivize utilities from adopting the energy transition, because they can't see an interest here. You have a misalignment of economic interests, and this, of course, will be reflected on the pipeline of projects that we would like to see here in Africa. So to make it short here, a digital metering infrastructure will first allow utilities and regulators to see the energy, differentiate between the energy consumed, energy produced, have an understanding of the flows of energy, and therefore be able to monetize those flows and place the costs on and relate it to the cost causality. So you can now understand, if you have this metering infrastructure, you can now understand the behavior of consumer, the cost drivers behind, and therefore be able to allocate costs accordingly. So this is one of the root causes. Indeed, there are many. I don't know if the time can, it would be possible or not, but at least maybe I should let also on the fact that you have in Africa a different regulatory model. Most of the African countries, they adopt either a single buyer model or a vertically integrated utility model. For example, if you look at the distribution utility in such case, it would be really in a hard situation to recover its costs. And basically, this is because the fact that in liberalized markets, distribution companies, they are mainly network companies, and they are only responsible for the distribution of electricity. But here, in most of the countries we see, in the MENA region, in sub-Saharan Africa, if you have the single buyer model implemented in place, then the distribution company is responsible for not only the network operation and costs, but also the energy retailing, and therefore they have to procure energy from generators, large-scale generators, and give it to consumer. And this would put them in an additional pressure, because they have to here allocate two costs now. You have to allocate first the network cost to consumer, and second the energy procured to consumers. But then, if you have this netting effect of the obsolete metering infrastructure, this means that costs will be further increased. You have an additional component here coming from the energy costs. So this is another dimension also that we need to take care of and quite work to address. Also, you have another issue here in Africa that we can see, and we cannot also see it in other liberalized markets or other environments, electricity market environments. And this is basically because of the socio-economic background. Here in most companies, in most countries, we resort to what we call it cross subsidies, having having like electricity segments, and you have a very high segment for higher consumption, and this segment will basically pay the highest tariff, and they have to not only pay for the costs of the system, but also pay for the others to use the system. And therefore, if you have those segments now currently going to use those adopted PV rooftop application, you will not have them in the system anymore, because basically they will go out and use electricity and have this netting effect and not paying anything to the utilities. Yet the utility, in their plans, in their financial models, they have been depending heavily on these segments to recover their costs. So this is also another challenge that we see here in Africa, and that is telling us more about the causes and the root causes between the barriers against the energy transition. So those are some of the, or let's say, the main ones that we should address and pay attention to.
Sure, these are many causes of the problems that we're still facing, and thank you for highlighting some of the causes, like cross-subsidization, which is actually not incentivizing utilities to go further in adopting renewable energies in the deployment of the grid. And I would like to know if Mr. Ruben or Joel have any other insights on this question.
So yeah, I first of all talked about the poor state of the grid as an inhibiting factor. Now, many people want to use solar in our country because of many reasons. The grid is not there. For days, you might not have the lights. I don't know whether there are other countries that employ our kind of tariff design. You have tariff bands A to E, 20 hours and above, and then you have 4 hours. So you can imagine where you are consigned to 4 hours of electricity per day, and that 4 hours might come or might not come. Now, many people would like to go solar, many people would like to use alternative power sources, but one of the biggest constraints is the affordability of solar solution. And one of the major reasons is the upfront cost of solar solution. You know, there's no doubt that at the end of the day, on long term, solar is much better. The costs, you don't incur operating costs and all of that, a minimum operating costs over time. But for the fact that you have to put all the money upfront in order to get solar solution is very difficult. And so far, the people who are able to deploy solar on their roofs are mostly, just like Mohammed talked about, the people who can afford to pay the higher tariff, people who can afford to deploy solar, and that number is significantly small. And then you have the issue of the fact that the components, the parts, the space, and so on and so forth are imported. And we've had a crisis about foreign exchange in our country, and so that adds to the very difficult proposition of having solar in your premises. Maybe I should talk about the situation that has lasted for long in Nigeria. That is that because of the power challenge we had in our country, people resorted to backup generators, diesel and petrol. Up until recently, petrol was reasonably priced in the country, so it was easy, you know, for anybody to buy different sizes, different kinds of generators, and there's some study that says that about 22 million, you know, generators are in service in Nigeria, and that is about is it 46% of all the generators in sub-Saharan Africa. They are in operation in Nigeria, and they provide about 42 gigawatt of capacity in the country. So there was no push to have solar because the generators were there. But the recent happenings with the removal of subsidy and so on and so forth, fuel has become a very major concern for most families, for most businesses. So I would think that with this happening, more people will consider solar, but they will be constrained by the fact that you need to put a lot of money upfront before you can deploy that. And again, people have different expectations about solar. So we have a situation where people who don't have a good understanding about solar, they go and procure some solar solution, and they find out that they can't carry their fridge, they can't carry their air conditioners, and so on and so forth, and they get disappointed, and they think that solar is a scam. So that's a problem. And you have several solar initiatives that have been done by government. For example, you have street lighting that on solar, but after about 6 months, they are no longer working. So when people see that there's this feeling that for all the buzzword, all the buzz and all the hype about solar, that it doesn't have much substance. So some people will not consider solar because of some of these developments. And of course, there are other factors, like the fact that you don't have in-country manufacturing. So a lot of things have to be imported. There is not enough technical knowledge. Even installers, there is not standards. The standards are at large. So people bring in all kinds of products, and at the end of the day, they say, is it elementary economics that bad money drives out good money? So at the end of the day, the cheap, inferior products, spoil the market for the good products of solar. Yes, this is where I'll stop for now.
Thank you very much. These are interesting insights from Nigeria, thinking about 22 million generators of a capacity of 42 gigawatts. From a generator, this could be replaced by solar if we have the right solutions in place, and this would yield benefits for the environment, especially in the situation where we know that fuel prices are going up. If we have the right incentives in place, we can replace this capacity by solar and have benefits from it. And you also mentioned the in-country capacity for manufacturing these solutions, and also the technical standards. These are really important because the initial investment, which you also mentioned, is really critical and currently not so affordable for everyone. So people really want to know, to be sure that what they are investing their money into is going to yield benefit for the expected number of years. And these are all root causes that we as professionals and policymakers need to be aware of, so that we can put in the right solutions for the deployment of solar PV in the different countries. Joel, do you have any final insights on the root causes that are still underpinning the deployment of solar PV in Africa?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting points raised by Mohammed and Ruben, and maybe I can just touch on some of them also from our own experience here. But again, I just wanted to reframe that when we talk about rooftop solar in Africa, or maybe in the world, we always talk about that individual customer at the residential or household level. It's not always the case, and that's why we tend to think that lack of affordability hinders in any way the growth of rooftop solar. But actually, in Africa, like I showed in my slide, is mostly businesses jumping on the wagon and making the most of the progress at the moment. So it's happening in another segment other than what we anticipated it to be, the residential. So it's happening. And when we talk about affordability, I just want to reflect on our own conversation with the utilities and the regulators. Can you believe that the business case or the payback period for rooftop solar PV investments for businesses ranges between 2 to 5 years in literally all the African countries that we've been working in. For 2 to 5 year investment, return on investment is like a no-brainer completely. That is why there's such a huge uptake in the commercial segment. So in a way, when I hear the issue of affordability, for me, it doesn't really strike home anymore, because I realize that if for the businesses, it's just a 2-year return on investment, that means affordability is really not a challenge anymore. It's literally a no-brainer compared to the conventional diesel genset or the utility power. But anyway, I will agree, I completely agree that it still remains a challenge, especially for the residential segment, because that's where footing the large upfront costs can be challenging, especially for the low-income customers. And I also want to pick up on the issue of the lack of skilled capacity. In Eswatini, for example, we were told at the beginning that for installations to happen in Eswatini, they had to rely on installers or skilled labor coming all the way from South Africa. Literally, for a system to be put up, they had to rely on a technician flying from South Africa to come and install the system and commissioning the system before it's connected to the grid. So that will add a lot to the upfront cost. And the lack of skilled capacity within these countries is really a challenge, not only in terms of the fast deployment of this technology, but also in terms of the safe deployment, because you will likely end up with a system that is underperforming, or even worse, that could impact the utility network in a bad way or in a negative way. I want to talk about the subsidized tariff that Mohammed touched on earlier, and also from one of our experience, I'm not going to mention the country, but there the situation on the ground is that the tariffs are so much subsidized that it actually doesn't make any business, there's no business case at all, even for the commercial customers who usually have the capital to afford these systems. So in a way, whether they decide to put in battery storage, whether they just go with rooftop solar PV, because of the largely subsidized tariff in that country, there's literally no uptake of rooftop solar or solar in general, simply because the tariffs are just too low to justify any investment for any alternative source. And then maybe lastly, I'm also going to touch on, again, the metering. I think it's still Mohammed that touched on that. The reason why we tend not to, or the reason why we feel there is no deployment on the ground, like Ruben was saying, is because we lack visibility on these systems. It's not that they are not happening. For example, Ruben, I would like to pick your brain on that, but I have 2 friends, Nigerian friends, who are living in Lagos, who I know have battery storage and rooftop solar PV. So my argument is that it's probably happening, but we are not aware of it because we have no visibility. And so in a way, the lack of adequate metering infrastructure to be able to see these systems on the network is another challenge to deployment, especially to the safe deployment of this technology. Because as we know, if this continue to proliferate in a sort of non-compliant manner, it could have a serious negative implications for the utility, not just economically in terms of revenues, but also technically.
All right.
Okay, so
Thank you very
maybe
much
if
for-
I might add
Yes,
something.
go on.
So the reality is a lot of people are adopting the solar technology, but to the best of my knowledge, integration with the grid is still not a reality in Nigeria. There is no distribution company because it doesn't make sense to them. First of all, they have a lot of problem. Even ordinary customer meters, basic customer meters are not provided. About 40% of the total customers in Nigeria, we have about 12 million customers. 40% of that, you know what it comes to, don't have meters. So when they don't have such basic things, then you talk about the digital solutions they need to have in place, to have rooftop solar, distributed within their networks. It becomes a different proposition. But to the extent that people are having things on their roof, in their car parks, or organizations, companies, and so on, yes, they're doing that, but there's not yet any plan about integration with the grid. That's just the position.
Yes, definitely. This is actually a point because we also have the off-grid rooftop, of course, and we would like to point out that there are benefits for these currently off-grid rooftop owners to integrate their surplus or to feed their surplus energy into the grid, but this has to be made in such a way that it benefits both the consumer, who then becomes the prosumer, and the utility. If this is not the case, then like you said, it doesn't make any sense for the utility to want to embrace that logic. And these are many of the problems and the root causes that we still need to face and to overcome to be able to fully leverage on the abundant and cheap resource that we have in Africa, which is solar. But then without wanting to stay too much on the problems, we would like to look at some of the solutions that are actually being implemented and what could we possibly do in the different countries to overcome these challenges, solve some of these problems, and be able to integrate solar PV into the grid in a sustainable way for everyone. So I would like to call on Joel again. You have developed in South Africa with your partners GIZ and maybe others a GIS enabled digital platform that helps utilities to control the permitting process for integration of rooftop solar. We would like to hear more about this and how were you able to develop that, and what are the perspectives for expanding this kind of platform to other countries?
Right, thank you. So we've been really working at the interface of facilitating the integration, like Ruben mentioned, of these sort of distributed solar PV systems to various electricity networks in sub-Saharan Africa. And South Africa was quite a good case study for us to sort of digitize, as we've been discussing today, moving towards a digital solution to make sure the permitting process is not just more effective, faster, but also safer. So if I can share again my screen quickly.
Yes, sure. I think you can use it.
Right, let me know if you can see this.
Yes, we can.
All right, okay. So like Jose, you mentioned, it was developed by us in partnership with the GIZ, SALGA, the South African Local Government Association. And it's mostly for the online application of what we call in South Africa small scale embedded generation, which is essentially on-site solar PV, or basically just rooftop solar PV. So what the platform has, it has a lot of cool features here, which unfortunately we can't cover it in its entirety. But if you come onto the platform, and by the way, this is the URL here, you can either log in as an applicant. Let's say I am a private customer who wants to put up rooftop solar on my premise. So I can come in here and log in and submit my application. Or if I am the utility by municipal, here we mean the utility, because in South Africa, the municipalities are also municipal distributors. So by municipal logging, that means this is the distributor logging in to see how many people or who has applied, who has submitted an application, and allowing him also to vet the application. So in terms of the utilities or municipal distribution utilities that are already part of the program, there are quite a few. You can see the list here, and this is not even the exhaustive list. there are other partners that are still inactive because they're waiting approval from their hierarchy before they begin to receive applications here. But essentially what this platform allows you to do, like I mentioned, is that you can submit an app. You don't need to send a paper-based application, or you don't need to fill in a paper anymore. You can just log onto the platform, and it takes you through a couple of pages, like any sort of online application that you can think of. It takes you through a series of pages where you have to fill in information about your system size, about your the various equipment. For example, you specify the type of inverter that you're going to purchase, the size of the system, maybe even specifications about your current connection with the utility, such as the notified maximum demand or the contracted capacity with the utility, and so on. And once you submit, you press the submit button, the utility on the other end receives that application. And the cool thing with this system is that it allows you, or it allows the automatic checks to be done online. So literally, when the utility receives the application, it already tells the utility if the application has met all the requirements, or if maybe there are some parameters or some measures that are out of bound. And to jump that quickly, you can come here. This is publicly accessible as well. You can come here to the dashboard. It gives you an idea of the various systems, the total amount of systems that have been registered on or approved via this platform, by type: commercial, agricultural, industrial, residential. It also allows battery storage, so someone can also apply for installation of battery storage through this platform. And it also has this map that gives you the sort of breakdown of the installations by utility or by municipality. And here, if we take, for example, the city of Ekurhuleni, it's a bit small. Yeah, Ekurhuleni. So it shows that since they joined the platform, they've received, or they've processed about 8.9 megawatt of rooftop solar PV applications via this platform. So it's really an important feature, because before the implementation of this platform, it used to take about 2 to 3 months for a utility to process an application until they give the formal approval to someone to go ahead with their installation. But with this, it has cut down application times to literally a few weeks. I was told this morning the average is about 2 weeks. So from 3 months down to 2 weeks, and it could actually be hours if the utility receiving the application acts fast on it. So it has really streamlined the whole application process in a way that allows not just the utility to be quite efficient in terms of permitting, but also allowing these systems to be a bit more compliant with the existing technical specifications and standards. Maybe one thing that I forgot to mention is that as you are applying, I'm going to take an example. Let's say the regulatory framework of South Africa says that me as a customer, I cannot install a system that is above my contracted capacity. So let's say my contracted capacity with the utility is 5 kilowatt, and I want to install a solar PV system. I go onto the platform, and then I specify that my solar PV system is going to be 6 kilowatt. Immediately, it's still going to allow me to proceed with the application, but immediately it's going to put a red flag on my application, both to me and also to the utility, that there is a parameter there that I'm exceeding. And so before even the utility goes through the detail of the application, it can already flag or send the message to the applicant that you need to revise your system size because it is above the allowed limit. And it's not the utility that does that calculation. The system automatically does that in the background checks. So it's I will just stop here, but it's really been welcomed by the distribution utilities in South Africa, and we're looking forward to rolling this in a few other countries across the continent. because we believe it indeed quite a huge development in terms of streamlining the whole application and allowing the utilities obviously to have much more visibility on the network. Maybe one last thing that I also forgot is that indeed, there is the GIS feature that you mentioned that allows the distribution utility to overlay these systems. For example, if we go to Ekurhuleni still, this small city here, it can take all the applications that it has received and overlay it with the GIS network, maybe of the city's network model, utility network model. So in that way, it is able to see where the systems are on the network, and I easily identify where there could be congestion in the near or long term. So in a way, it overlays all the systems that are already on the network with the existing utility network model, and gives it a much better visibility in terms of actioning on where congestion needs to be released or not. Okay, I'll stop there, Jose.
Thank you very much, Joel, for sharing this very interesting platform with us. And we see that it has many features that allow utilities to actually reduce considerably. You mentioned from 3 months to 2 weeks the permitting process for integrating rooftop solar in the grid. This is already a great step, reducing the permitting time, and also being able to monitor where the production is and where there could be congestions, and also allowing the consumers who want to integrate their rooftop into the system to do so from wherever they are. This is great, and we hope that you are working towards deploying this kind of solution in more countries, in more municipalities, right, in South Africa and also beyond. So this being a first step, I would say we still need to look at the holistic view. So what are some foreseeable solutions of leveraging on digital technologies to improve or encourage the deployment of rooftop solar? And we're talking about technical solutions like regulatory adjustments that will be needed to encourage the deployment of digital technologies. What are the capacity building needs, and also what are the financial needs that we need to look at when we want to solve the problems and bring forward the adoption of rooftop PV. So I would like to call on any of you, if Mohammed, you want to start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rob. Well, I take it back to the point at which we started discussing the challenges, and I think that and I think most of the developers also think like this, and the rooftop owners. If we want to have those distributed systems in place and have them everywhere in Africa, we need to think about rates, because those are really the main control element. Controlling the investment process is, as Joel said, it's all dates to the fact that we need to look at the payback period of the project before having it. So in order to have a pipeline of project, there should be sustainable rates in place, sustainable tariffs in place, tariffs that can first allow for the adoption of those systems and those rooftop applications. And second, they can have sustainable remuneration, sustainable cash flows for the utility to cover its costs and the costs that it will incur in the adoption and the integration of those systems. So here the question comes as, how can we reach at those, let us say, efficient system of tariffs? How can we have those efficient system and tariffs in place? And I think the first and foremost thing is to collect data, to understand the data in the environment that we have, in the market, in the electricity market that we have. And I think that what Joel presented us is a quite important development in the way to collect data about the system, about the penetration of those rooftop application, about the need to enforce the grid, about the investments that we will need in both the assets itself, the rooftop application itself, but also the the network and its assets that we will have to bring in. So this is the first thing: is to collect data about those about the market, and second is to come at a fair and efficient cost allocation methodology. And how can we have this methodology in place? How can we have a system of tariffs that can really allocate costs to the actor in the market that is responsible for this cost? And I think that there has been many designs all over the world about tariffs and about rates, about prices, that can be efficient and can be fair in the allocation of prices. And important element here to consider is the cost causality. How do we incur costs? For example, if a utility would like to make, let us say, a grid enforcement in a certain area to adopt a certain capacity of PV, the investment here, who should pay for it? Is it the utility? Is it the developer of this rooftop PV system? Here, these are the kind of question that we need to look at. And indeed, if we have a system in place that could be efficient, it could even guide the developers in placing their systems, their rooftop application in the best place that will minimize the enforcement cost of the utility. So all of these, and here we're referring to like a very simple principle that is yet simple in understanding, yet hard to implement, is the locational pricing of electricity and connection costs to the grid. So these are the quite important parameters. Again, we need for these models, we need data, but we need also to have the digital models, the tools, and implement it. And we have seen some success stories in the region where they have a quite understanding of the cost, the resulting cost in the system, and a quite good system in allocating it. So we have to go through this process, starting from the collection of data and the planning of the costs and the incurred costs through having a visibility over the network and the network needs to adopt those new systems. And then we go for the cost allocation, the tariff, the system of an efficient and fair system of prices that mostly need to reflect and cover the grid investment needs, and signal it to the consumer. So you can have a guided consumer who's guided by the system cost, who can really invest in a utility-friendly manner. And this is how we derive here like a mutual interest between the utility and the pioneers of the energy transition. So this could be a solution for the system. And as I said also, that we have seen some successful case studies implementing the planning practice, efficient planning practice, efficient system of pricing in the region and all over the world. And we can implement those systems here in Africa and speed up the energy transition. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your insights. Any insight from your end, Shuaib?
Yes, I can come in quickly. I also want to reflect quickly on the sort of advantages or opportunities that these systems bring before I move on to the solution. For example, you see in South Africa, maybe some of you might be aware of it, but we've had maybe our worst energy crisis in decades over the past 3 to 4 years. Thankfully, it's now all over, hopefully behind us. But it shattered the whole economy for a good number of years, 3 to 4 years. And also that was a very good incentive for people to seek alternative supply of energy, and notably rooftop solar PV or on-site battery storage and solar PV. That's also one of the reasons why we've had a huge or phenomenal growth in South Africa. And a very data-packed article was released a few weeks ago, trying to analyze why is it that we're no more experiencing power outages since the past 200 days. And it came down to 2 reasons. The first reason was that the coal fleet, the performance of the coal fleet in general, improved significantly. And the second reason, guess what? It's because of rooftop solar PV, which significantly reduced the demand of the network, especially during the day, and therefore given the network also some breathing space to be able to handle the usual load. So in a way, there is this tangible positive development as a result of rooftop solar PV. And also just last week in Madagascar, we were exchanging with the utility there, and they informed us that almost all their transformers are over 90% loaded already or overloaded. So in a way, there's little capacity left on most of their transformers, or the network is completely congested. So in a way, for them, a good national-driven policy will be to be very generous with these rooftop solar PV systems so that they can be deployed in a massive way at first to decongest the network. Because, you know, the more you install on the distribution side, the more you release some capacity on some of those transformers up until a certain threshold. So what I wanted to say was that a way or another solution to think about it, and also holistically speaking, is that I feel and I believe that for African countries like ourselves that direly need this much needed megawatt or generation coming online, I think there needs to be more national driven policies or high level enabling environments or strategies that allow these systems to flourish as much as they can, but obviously not to meet individual or private needs, but in a way that benefits the whole society at large, and that some people are not left behind. But obviously the other more practical one also to add to Mohammed will be on the technical specifications. You see the platform that I showed earlier would have been completely useless if South Africa didn't have technical specifications in place, because the whole aim of the platform is to streamline the application process. And to be able to do that, it has to base it off technical specifications in place. So if in a country like Cameroon, my own home country, doesn't have technical specification in place, there's little we can do to fast track this process, or there's little we can do to streamline this whole permitting process, because we have to first of all have that in place. So and that's why a big focus of our technical support program has been to develop technical standards, technical specifications. If not, how as a utility can I know, or do I know that I can accommodate up to 30 megawatt of rooftop solar if I don't know how much capacity I can host on my network? So in a way, those technical standards are there to safeguard the whole network for everyone.
Thank you, Joel. And I think you're very right. Capacity is a technical capacity is really important. And when we also look at the side of the prosumer, we want to know what we could possibly feed into the grid. So all of these are need to be set into the grid code, into the technical specifications that utilities use, and this could be done with the implication of the regulators. And I would like to call on Ruben, given all the challenges and problems that you listed, what are some solutions for improving the current regulatory status of the electricity market in Nigeria, or maybe in more African countries, to be able to encourage utilities and consumers to connect the rooftop PV into the grid, while ensuring that everybody is benefiting from this kind of win-win situation.
Thank you very much. I align completely with what Mohammed said. At the heart of the discussion is the place of the distribution utility. If the distribution utility is not there, you cannot be talking about integration. And that requires that we look at the distribution utility. In different parts of Africa, there are different operating situations. Okay, so I saw the net metering regulations that was issued earlier this year by Kenya, and there's the network, net metering code that was issued by Ghana last year, and they contained all the standards and the requirements for integration. But that requires that the network is there. Now, when the network is not there, where, for example, in my country, where we have about 11 distribution companies and almost all of them are sick. Now, how do you begin to talk about integration with them? So it requires that there is a holistic discussion about the health of the disco. And I know that there's an advocacy that Professor Iriaga has, eloquently articulated in his integrated distribution framework model, for looking at the condition of the distribution company. I can't speak, I don't have time to go into the details of that, but we need to have a distribution company that works so that it can have the required solar injection into the network. And it should be such that the distribution company sees value in it. So there are two things. Mohammed talked about the tariff. Yes, the distribution company must see that it is a win-win situation. If it is not a win-win situation, there is no reason why they should want to embrace it. And that requires that, first of all, I saw I think in the Ghana regulation, it says that the net, what do you call it now? The price that the distribution company pays for the excess that's injected in the grid must not be at the retail price. That is to say, the distribution company will pay less to the rooftop solar owner than what it charges its customers. I think, well, some views might feel that it is not right, but I think you got to start somewhere. That's like Mohammed said, there are network costs that if you don't do some clever or innovative tariff design, the network costs will be avoided by the rooftop solution owners, because most tariffs in Africa are kilowatt hour and straight line tariff like that. So at the end of the day, you are actually being subsidized by the other consumers who don't have rooftop solar, who don't have distributed networks on their premises. So a clever tariff design is very important, and the rooftop solar must be able to pay its fair share of the of the cost of the distribution company. And it must be presented in such a way that the distribution company sees value in it before it can embrace it. And of course, there's a need for government involvement in it, because most things about renewable energy adoption and acceleration require government support through different initiatives, both for the utility and for the adopters of the renewable energy technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I think you've laid down the path for the other side of the problem, the remuneration of the utility. Because if we look at the current state of things, it is obviously beneficial for any customer to be able to feed the surplus electricity into the grid and have it compensated with the expensive electricity that they are consuming drawing from the grid in the evening where electricity is expensive, for instance. So we must also focus at the benefits for the utility to be able to engage in that in receiving or connecting the rooftop PV into the grid. So as you clearly said, PV electricity during the day is cheap because the resource is there and the demand is low. So any consumer who produces surplus energy and feeds it into the grid during the day and wants to have electricity back in the evening, there is a problem because most of the meters that we have are volumetric meters. So they just count what is the net electricity that was drawn from the grid. So if you produce as much as you consume, if you produce in the day as much as you consume in the night, you may think that your net is zero, but actually the cheap electricity from the day is being balanced by the expensive electricity in the night, just because mostly the tariff is based on a volumetric metering, which is a dollar or whatever currency by kilowatt hour. But this is not beneficial for the consumers. And net metering is even making the situation worse because we are actually incentivizing, like you said, people who feed into the grid without actually making the difference between the quality or the price of the electricity during the day and the price of the electricity that they are drawing from the grid during the night. So this is a challenge that we need to tackle and make rooftop solar integration interesting, appealing for utilities. And the only way to do this is to have advanced metering infrastructure, like you rightly mentioned, and also advanced metering structure could help have, for instance, a dynamic pricing of time of use. So we clearly differentiate the actual price of the electricity during the day and what we are drawing from the grid during the night. But this is the only way, and the tools that we need to do this is only by digital technologies. So which is currently not so available in Africa. And then I would like to have your views on what should utilities think about clearly when they want to have this rooftop integration in a sustainable way, in a profitable way for them, and how could these different digital tools like advanced metering infrastructure or also energy management systems could help have these time of use tariffs and these innovative pricing models for the utilities to be interested in this rooftop PV market. So I would call on each of you, and then we can look at the chat. If there are any questions, we would have them as end questions for the discussion for today. Thank you. Would you like to start, Mohammed?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rock. Well, I just need to, you've mentioned it and you've summed the whole story, really. And what I can say at this moment is that it is a matter of fact that we need to have a tariff system in place that can reflect that can differentiate between the electricity prices along the day, along the week, mainly between different time slots. So in order to have a viable system of prices that can really push the market. And this having a system, an efficient system of prices that can really differentiate between different time will stop this netting impact that we can see. And then this is fair for both the utilities and for the developers, because for the project developer, what is needed is to have a pipeline of projects. And a pipeline of project can only be reached at if you have really a willing utility to go, and a utility that can see its interest in the adoption of the energy transition. So we need to focus more on the long term, because I see and I understand that perhaps this netting impact, the one that is neglecting the temporal value of electricity, would be favored by some of the installers, the owners of those PV systems. But in order to have a bigger picture, to have the long-term horizon, the more important fruit of having a sustainable pipeline of projects is to have this in place, to have a differentiated system of prices that can reflect the temporal value of electricity. So this is the first one. The second one is also related to tariffs, and it capitalizes on the point of Reuben. And again, here want to mention some fact that the energy transition in Africa is not just about renewable energy projects. It is also more about having networks in place, because you can't have energy transition without networks, and networks come at a cost, and we should pay attention to this. We should have a system in place also that can remunerate utilities against what they invest. And we have a very good sign here of willingness. If we look at the investments coming in networks in Africa, and let us say, the transition to a more privately owned distribution utilities in Africa, we can see it coming into play in place. This is not the transition in our electricity markets in Africa is not just going through the line of liberalized wholesale markets. It is going in another direction, as we can see. It is going more towards more investments in the ownership of the distribution utilities. And therefore, we need really to capitalize on this momentum, have fair and efficient pricing of network investments to allow for the increased electrification in Africa from the private sector. And this can happen also through a quite fair system of tariffs that can reflect the value of networks and the costs of networks, and reflect what we call it the responsibility of investments. Because if there is a need to invest in a certain area, then we should have a system price that can allocate the costs resulting from this investments to the people who have been in need of this network investment. So if we think in those two lines, I would say that we would have a pipeline of projects. We would have the energy transition having coming at a steady state, and a quite sustainable way of implementation in Africa. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Insight from you, Joel?
Yes, I agree exactly with the other two panelists. Maybe also some quick insights is from the countries we've been working with, is that we tend not to be doing quite badly compared to the rest of the world. First of all, this is an uncharted territory, not just for African utilities, but also for the rest of the world. And I promise you that till today, even after 10 years of seeing this deployment in these advanced markets, they are still trying to find the right formula, both in terms of pricing, in terms of integration of this technology to the network. So we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves if we're not getting it right at the moment. But one thing that we picked up was that in most of these countries where you have huge scale deployment, and like I mentioned, it's mostly in the commercial and industrial sector, most utilities, and I would like to check if, Ruben, that's also your case in Nigeria or for your DISCO, that for most commercial and industrial customers, they already have unbundled tariffs. So it's not just they don't have the issue of volumetric charges that as the residential segment has. So that is mostly applicable to the residential segment across almost every utility. But the commercial, surprisingly or interestingly, they already do have unbundled tariffs. So in a way, a tariff that reflects not just the energy charge, but also the capacity charge and various other fixed charges. So for us, I think that was a good development, at least in the 10 countries we're working, to see that there is some level of unbundling of the tariff in a way that also protects already the utility from losing a lot of revenue through the issue of perverse cross-subsidization, as we have mentioned earlier. But again, I would like to echo one of the points that Ruben and Mohammed mentioned about setting the appropriate tariffs. We also did pick up in the various net metering rules that were released that, interestingly, we are also quite conservative, which is good because most countries in the developed world and our advanced market are sort of going backward into like being a bit more conservative about how they compensate for excess electricity fed to the grid. So in a way, Ghana, Kenya, Namibia, even South Africa, they all do what we call net billing. It's true they call it net metering, but it's actually net billing because they are not compensating at the retail price or at the retail rate. They are sometimes compensating like half of the retail rate, or sometimes a quarter of the retail rate. So in a way, we are doing well in that aspect. Maybe it's a bit too conservative, but I think it's a safe way to approach the transition in a way that does not destabilize financially completely the distribution utilities. But I think my strong point, again, is in line with the two other panelists in that we do need fair compensation in place. We do need fair tariffs. We do need tariffs that reflect adequately the true value of these systems that they are as they are connected to the network, not just in terms of the benefits, economic, social, and environmental that they bring, but also in terms of the incurred or accrued cost to the utility for hosting these systems to the network. And I think on that, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for the insights. Ruben, do you have any end thoughts?
Thank you. So just briefly to say that for commercial and industrial in Nigeria, there's just one tariff, which is energy. It's not broken into fixed and all of that. So that's part of the problem that the distribution companies are struggling with. They want to bring it back, but that's another discussion. Finally, I would like to say, I don't know whether this is popular or not, but I've seen in some literature that want to say that they want to see a level playing where distributed compete on the same footing with the utility in terms of tariffs and all of that. And I don't seem to agree with that. I don't seem to agree with that because if near integration in the grid is presented as a competition with the distribution utilities, I don't see the reason why they should embrace it. Who would like to have his computer by inside his own house? So I think it should be, maybe there will be a time for competition, but at this initial time of trying to open the door for adoption, it should not be made to look like rooftop solar solution is in competition with the grid. It should not be presented that way. This is my humble opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I think this is a strong point that needs to resonate with us all participants in this discussion, because rooftop solar should not bring competition between prosumers and distribution utilities, but promote a win-win situation for everybody and for the continent. And with this, I would like to thank you very much. I think we are at the end of the time that we have for this webinar. Thank you for your insight, for sharing your knowledge and experience on the topic. And we think that it is really important that policymakers, utilities, and also consumers understand that the problem lies on both ends, and we should leverage on solutions. In this case, digital solutions are the only or most expected way to be able to bring about this win-win solution when it comes to rooftop solar integration in the grid in Africa. With these words, I would like to thank our valuable panelists for bringing your expertise on the table. And I see Professor Ignacio is here. If he would
just
like
to say thank you very much for an excellent performance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So we are at the end of this webinar, and I would like to remind our audience that the recording will be available on our website and also our YouTube page, so you feel free to rewatch later. And also, you could find more recordings from past events, and we would like to see you again in our upcoming events and training activities And I would use this opportunity to invite you already next week, Wednesday, same time, 2 p.m. GMT, to another interesting webinar on the role of local communities in the just energy transition in Africa. The webinar will be in French, and I would be happy to moderate as well. But if you are an English speaker, you also have the interpretation feature that you could use, and you would have the opportunity to also listen and interact with our panelists. Thank you. And with that, I would say goodbye for now and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. And greetings to Prof.